Hello, my name is Connor Mead, and I'm here today at the 2016 Canadian Science Policy Conference with Hassan Khan, who's the CEO and founder of Quantius. So thank you so much for joining us, Hassan.
Thank you, Connor.
Why don't we start by telling me a little bit about Quantius, what makes it unique and what makes it important?
You know, before Quantius was founded, I spent a lot of time all over the world looking to see how can you find ways of making knowledge-based companies grow, right? And the big challenge that these small and medium businesses have, and Canada has a lot of them, not just in space, but in aerospace and all kinds of other fields, is they have a few things that make them different. The first is they're complicated, right? You might have a company with only 50 employees in it, but they're global. You'll have a space company and they're doing a new sensor that goes into satellites and spaceships and whatever else, and they're exporting to multiple nations. So they have global customers. They have global competition too. They are competing for bids with companies from Europe, from the US, from Asia. And then when you look inside the company, you have this technology black box, right? And that's hard to understand too. And when you combine all of those things, and in addition, most of their value, it's all in what we call intangible assets and intellectual property. And those are things like patents, software, data, proprietary designs, permits, licenses, trademarks, copyrights. That's where all the value of their company is. But these are not traditional collateral assets that a lender can recognize. So the thing that we do is different, is we can identify those companies. We can very quickly get clarity on all that complexity and the global nature of their existence. And we can also look at all those off-balance sheet intangible assets and give them credit. And that ends up with a solution where if you're a small company and you're earning anywhere from a few million to 50 to 75 million, we walk in and say, you know what, you've got a lot of potential, you want to grow, we can extend a lot of capital, 2 to 15 million plus, but do it in a non-dilutive way so that we're not asking for ownership of their business along with that capital. And then that makes it a lot easier for that company to actually get to medium-sized.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So, if you don't mind speaking to it, what are some of the processes that you use to assess the value of these non-traditional intangible assets?
The real thing around those assets is just recognizing that, just like I talked about the businesses, they're complex. Well, these things aren't that simple as well. If you look at something like a patent, right? And you look at a company that has produced, a new avionics solution, and they've got a whole bunch of patents around it, and they had really smart PhDs, and they spent years developing this thing. Well, then you have to look at it and say, well, is this really special? Because we have PhDs all around the world working in the same fields. They're all producing patents and new products in this area. And we need to look at what these guys have created and compare it to everything else and be able to relatively assess its value. So then it actually turns into a big data analytics problem because you have 100 million registered patents in the world. And that's a lot of complexity to sort through. So with a combination of Quantius, as well as US partners, like we've got a partner with a company called MChem, and they do a lot of these analytics as well, we look at all these assets and say, what does this mean in terms of what is the quality of what they've produced? How much is it worth as collateral? And we answer a bunch of questions like that. But through the use of analytics, we can get to answers much more quickly than if you just tried to use your head and manual effort.
Fantastic. So by bringing this intelligence and bringing this analytical capacity to Canadian finance, what do you see as the outcomes for Canadian companies, for the Canadian economy as a whole?
I think really for the company, we want to avoid what I'd call the typical Canadian story. Mm-hmm. Where I'll come with a different view because I know in Canada we spend a lot of time talking about we have got to innovate better. I think we're pretty good at it. We produce great innovators, great entrepreneurs, we produce a lot of companies. Our challenge is in scaling it up and really commercializing, right? So what this is intended to provide is provide the business owners and management and entrepreneurs and inventors with another option that doesn't include them getting bought out and going down to the United States or another country as an example, of going public, but going public far too early when they're not large enough to be able to sustain the regulatory and administrative overhead of being on the public market, or not necessarily wanting to then be a slave to the quarterly performance cycle, right? Because they've got to execute a long-term strategy. So we want to give them an alternative that will extend them and allow them to get bigger, so that they don't have to wander into those areas where either we produce Canadian innovation, but it's actually going to be commercialized elsewhere, or they end up in what I'd call a funding sand trap. They get some short-term funding, but it lands them in trouble.
So what do you think are some high growth, high potential sectors that can especially benefit from this innovative approach to financing?
Well, certainly as we're all here today and talking about space, like within space, there's a number of areas that relate to robotics, machine learning and AI, how we think about data analytics, because it's really all around the data. We might send things up into space, but we're doing that to collect information, typically about what's happening here on Earth, right, and pushing that back down. So within each of those areas, you have a lot of growth and clusters that are developing. And then there's some other places where things are happening in quite surprising ways, right? Like within medical technology, or more localized manufacturing, like 3D printing, where you have technologies being developed in other non-space sectors that actually have real application in space. You can think about composite and advanced materials being another place where that occurs. And what we have within the Canadian economy is a lot of those other sectors as well, where it's relevant to space and vice versa. I think the overall opportunity is, and this is being looked at a lot, like if you look at the Business Development Bank of Canada, they did a study a while back and they basically asked the question and said, where is Canada's mid-sized economy? And that was really important because those mid-sized companies are the ones that drive the most stable jobs. They create cottage industries, more businesses spring up. And there was another report produced by the Canada International Council, and they were looking at intellectual property and innovation. And they figured out that we're losing about $5 billion a year in intellectual property and innovation that we create here in Canada, but is never commercialized here. It's acquired early for what I'd call a very discounted price and then developed elsewhere. So the real opportunity we have is that by providing a capital solution to these companies so they can keep going, we can lessen or even reverse a bit of those two trends.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's definitely something the Canadian scale-up ecosystem needs. My last question before we go, for any viewers at home, any entrepreneurs or investors or anyone else who would like to talk about this more with you, where can they find you online?
They can find us online at www.quantius.ca, and we've got a main office in Toronto, but we're pretty mobile, so we've been pretty much from one side of the country to the next, but not hard to get a hold of.
Fantastic. Hassan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting.
Thank you.